Welcome to Spiritual Insurgency. I'm Jason Lubow with my co-host Aaron Lujan,
What's up, everybody?
talking about the top news of the day. I I,
Today.
I think it was kind of interesting. Vance was talking to some reporters on his way. I don't know where he was heading. He was on his way to get onto a plane. Said some very interesting things about diplomacy when it came to Ukraine and Russia, but I think it gives us some really interesting insight as to the Trump administration's stance on diplomacy as a whole. Vance basically saying, hey, look, we came to the negotiating table and we tried to understand what Russia wanted and we tried to understand what Ukraine wants. And either they're going to agree or not. And if they say no, then we're going to step away from this table because we're not going to spend any more time or energy on this. And I think we should just roll the clip just so that, we don't get everything wrong. But here's the clip of J.D. Vance and what J.D. Vance has to say about Ukraine and Russia.
At this point, based on where negotiations are, what do you think is next in that process? And do you think that the U.S. should still hang on and take part in those negotiations?
Well, I'm going to echo something Secretary Rubio said, which is, look, we've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the parties saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace.
Well, I do think it's a very bold move from the Trump administration in this war against between Russia and Ukraine. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
I made an entire documentary on what happened, and it's important to note that if you go back to the initial conflict, the nation of Ukraine underwent what's known as a color revolution. So their democratically elected government was overthrown by then State Department head Victoria Nuland under the Obama administration. So they meddled in that election and they overthrew the will of the Ukrainian people. Crimea is a peninsula that's a part of Ukraine that's ethnically Russian. It would be similar to say that Southern California or Southern Arizona is predominantly Hispanic. It would be like as if people in Southern Arizona, where they predominantly speak Spanish and are of Hispanic ethnicity, decided to secede to Mexico because there's a cultural and language affinity towards the mother country. So what ended up happening was when the United States meddled in that election and they overthrew the Ukrainian government and installed their puppet government. That puppet government were essentially the grandchildren of the Nazis. They were very anti-Jewish, and they were very, I guess, what you would consider ethnic supremacist, where they opposed the Russian language and the Russian culture. So they went into Crimea and they started spray painting swastikas on temples, and they actually passed laws that said it was illegal to speak the Russian language. So naturally, the Crimean people were like, hold up, wait a minute, we're going to actually try to back on out of this. And so there's a provision in the Crimean constitution, and Crimea is essentially like a province of Ukraine, and they exercised their constitutionally granted rights and voted to secede to Russia out of, one could only observe, self-preservation, because they were under threat by then the newly installed Ukrainian government. Ron Paul came out during that time and completely supported that. And the narrative in the media, in the corporate media at that time, was Russia's invading Crimea and they're the aggressors in this situation, and it's a takeover. Look at the imperialistic Putin. when in reality it was the Crimean people that were just simply exercising their constitutional rights. So to sit back, to fast forward into 2025 and see almost what looks like an about face on the Trump administration, which I applaud and agree with, because it is in the spirit of peace to allow the will of the Crimean people to have their voice heard. So the fact that they're now giving this concession and allowing this to take place, one, is an about face to the media narrative from a couple years back. Secondly, it definitely is an advancement of peace. Third, it's really putting the situation in a bad light for Zelensky in Ukraine. He's obviously lost full control of that country, and I think that it speaks to the trade deal, the negotiations that are happening between Russia and the United States. Trump is seceding to Russia.
It's a very interesting dynamic. I think this entire war is pretty interesting from a lot of different perspectives. But Zelensky basically, I think, has, I don't want to say this in the wrong way, but like enjoyed this conflict way too much.
I think there's a lot of cocaine involved. That's where a lot of the funds went, is my understanding.
Well, why didn't we just send Hunter Biden's cocaine over to him if that's what he wanted?
We could have just brokered a deal where he goes to a Hunter Biden party and then we're good.
Yeah, like end the war, stop taking U.S. dollars, just go do some drugs with Hunter and call it good.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting. What else do we got, Aaron?
There is earthquakes in various places. In Matthew 24:7, for nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in divers places. I guess back in the English days, divers was like, pirates out in the sea, far away places. This place is Istanbul. There was an earthquake in Istanbul today, and I believe this is God speaking to his people, saying, I'm coming back, and I'm coming back soon. So this should all just be another opportunity to evaluate yourself and say, am I working out my salvation in fear and trembling? Am I abiding? But yeah, I think the fact that we're seeing these occurrences happen is just more credence to the scriptures that we are in the last hours of the last days.
It does seem like we have faced a lot more natural disasters as of late. I mean, we've seen hurricanes strengthen. We've seen far more tornadoes. We have an increased amount of earthquakes at the present moment, or at least massive earthquakes. The forest fires have raged on, and we look at all those natural disasters, and the only thing that comes to my mind, or the first thing that comes to my mind, is the fact that man has for far too long screwed with the environment, and I think that's what's leading to some of this stuff. Not to take away from the fact that we are living in the end times. We've been living in the end times since the death, burial, resurrection, and then the reascension of Jesus Christ. So we are in the end times. We've been in the end times. We're going to continue to be in the end times. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that when you look at the cloud seeding that's taking place, the weather manipulation, the fact that we have completely screwed up the entire forestry industry because of we got to hug some trees. I think that all of that is a large factor in what we are presently seeing with the natural disasters taking place around the globe.
New York Post is reporting Democrat Judge Joel Cano banned by New Mexico Supreme Court after alleged Tren de Aragua. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing Aragua right. The Venezuelan gang, the one that's now designated a international terrorist organization, gang member arrested in his home. So we have a Venezuelan terrorist, is what I'll call them, because they're no longer considered gang members. They're now considered international terrorists. Was living in Jose Cano's home, and Jose Cano's a Democratic New Mexico judge. And this is just, I think, a highlight and a marker on how absolutely and utterly and desperately corrupt our judicial and our legislative branches of government are. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this story other than I want to bring this to the front of the church, because the church was warned in Scripture that when our governmental powers are no longer working towards God's will, we are going to have chaos and absolute suffering in the land. So it's our responsibility, church, to hold the line, because clearly government has dropped it.
I think that we've had an issue with our judicial system for a very long time. I mean, we have basically, I put very little faith in our judicial system at the present moment. Not to mention that I believe that during COVID, the whole judicial system was completely unconstitutional in terms of delaying the trials of millions of Americans across the country because, we're going to delay justice. And then what came as the end of that was now we have hundreds and thousands of criminals being released on the streets on personal recognizance bonds because they didn't want to keep anybody in the jail because of COVID either. It was kind of a mess. It was a mess for those that were presently in the system. It was a mess for those that were entering into the system. And it did not make America any safer at all. And then at the same time, those that were being tried who were innocent were basically forced to wait and hold on and continue and push out their trial, costing them thousands of dollars. And so this whole idea that the guilty are going to be moved through the court system fast and the innocent are going to be moved through the court system fast for the good of the American public and for our own constitutional rights and the ability to defend ourselves from the judicial system and from prosecution. It's an absolute freaking nightmare, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, there's another story that's really speaking out to me. Today, Jordan, the nation of Jordan, not Michael Jordan, but the country of Jordan, banned the Muslim Brotherhood, seized their assets, and shut down their offices. And I think this is an interesting story because the narrative in the corporate media is that everybody in the Middle East are terrorists and they're all bad, and it's an oversimplified narrative that the American people are fed, when in reality, what we just witnessed today in the story is that the Jordanian government is opposed to terrorism. There are, just like Bashar al-Assad's Syria, where Christians could live in peace, there are Middle Eastern countries that I think are deserving to be our ally in this oversimplification. And now I'm starting to provide commentary, but this oversimplification of that Israel's the only good guy and a sea of bad guys is just simply patently wrong. I think Muslim Brotherhood has been alleged to be a creation of the CIA during the Cold War era. And so to see Ron Paul's prophetic words that if you meddle in the affairs overseas, there will be blowback. And fortunately, we have apparently a sane government in Jordan that's putting an end to this. So we don't always need to drop bombs on countries to stop terrorists. We could actually, through diplomacy, like what the head of Jordan is doing, creating peace by getting rid of this group, which I think happened to be a fraternity that Obama's brother was involved in, wasn't? Or no, that's Boko Haram. I get my terrorist organizations confused, but any thoughts?
It's intriguing, right? Because I've said on this show for a long time that I believe that nations have the responsibility to take care of the terrorist groups and the terrorist cells that are inside of their nation. And when the people allow those groups to take power over their country, and then wonder why they have interference from foreign governments, that would be why. Now, I did have somebody make the argument the other day that maybe I put the cart before the horse, and the fact that these terrorist organizations are spawning based on the what's the right word? The meddling of others in their country that basically necessitates a terrorist organization to spawn and to take control. I don't know if I buy that opinion or if I buy that philosophy, but either way, we've seen terrorism grow throughout the world. We've talked about it, and it's time to do something about it. And so it'll be interesting to see what takes place around the globe in these upcoming months.
That's all I got, Jason. That was Wednesday hump day.
That's Wednesday. It's hump day. All right. Join us every weekday and Saturday at 3 p.m. Well, Saturday will be at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. But join us every day during the week at 3 p.m. for a breakdown of the news cycle from a biblical perspective. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you tomorrow.
Peace.